This is the first of our studio sessions. It's a series. We're filming here from the studio. Well, I am anyway. My guests are obviously in their own self-isolated places. But for those of you who don't know, probably most of you do know who have signed in. The studio is the Bendigo Creative Industries Hub, which was an initiative of Creative Victoria and is being delivered by Acme and is essentially a co-working space that will deliver business development programming for creatives. Obviously, during this time, it's a little bit hard to be working in a co-working space. So like many people, we have thought about how we can continue to offer value to our local creative community. And what we've come up with is the studio sessions. So welcome to the studio sessions. This is the first. And the studio sessions are a series of inspiring, hopefully, thought-provoking and informative online presentations and discussions with the aim of elevating the conversation around creativity for Bendigo and regional Victoria more broadly. We're going to be featuring a range of creatives from Bendigo and further afield. And the studio sessions are really your interactive opportunity to engage and communicate and be a part of that conversation. So my name's David Hughes. I'm the manager of the studio, and I'm going to be your host for these sessions. For this first studio session, what we wanted to do was have a bit of a talk about the creative landscape and explore what that looks like for Bendigo and what that looks like for regional Victoria. Have a think about what we're doing well, what could we be doing better, how are we nurturing and supporting local creatives, what support's out there, what are the opportunities. Your thoughts and your comments and your questions for our panel are encouraged. So please do put some in the Facebook comments, and we will try to answer any that come through, or as many as that we can. What would be good to know from our perspective, I'll kick off with some questions if you like. And it'd be great if you could put them in the comments, answers to these. We're really keen to know how your creative practice is faring within this difficult period. What's been the impact on your creative business? Has your work dried up? And if so, what are you doing to address that, to keep yourself busy, to help prepare yourself for coming out the other side? I'd love to know what you're doing. And the other thing we'd love to know is what support are you looking for as a creative business within Bendigo or regional Victoria? What is the support that you guys require? Because obviously, that's what we're here for, and it's always good to get the feedback from the people who are here to help. Just a quick one, not to forget to join our upcoming sessions as well. On the 21st of May, we've got a one-on-one conversation with Christian Wagstaff. He is the mastermind behind the House of Mirrors and 1,000 Doors, which many of you will probably remember was in Rosslyn Park over the last few years, and they're fantastic. So he's a very inspiring and very funny man to talk to. On the 4th of June, we're having another panel session similar to this, exploring the local performing arts sector. And on the 18th of June, we've got a presentation by Ball and Doggett on the world's favourite colour. And that should be an interesting one as well. But today, we are very lucky to have a couple of people who have both been instrumental in the development of government strategy to do with creatives. One at a local level and one at a state level. So I'll get straight into introducing them. And first up, we have Mr. Matt Emond, Councillor Matt Emond. I'll do a little introduction. So Councillor Matt Emond was elected to the City of Greater Bendigo Council in 2016. He's currently serving as Deputy Mayor. And having grown up in Bendigo, Matt studied theatre, directing at Victorian College of Arts. He's completed an Executive Master of Arts from the University of Melbourne. He has trained theatre artists, worked as a theatre director, and was arts advisor to Mark Dreyfus QC MP. And during his time as the Shadow Arts Minister in Canberra. In recent years, he's guided the development of key policies to support the growth of Australia's arts and creative industries while trying to balance his own creative practice. He sits on a number of cultural boards and committees, including the Golden Dragon Museum Board, the Bendigo Art Gallery Board, and the Victorian Actors Benevolent Trust. And my own little note, he also plays tuba in the City of Greater Bendigo Brass Band, and I've been trying to Didn't seem to give us a tune, but I'm not sure he's got it on him at the moment today. So thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks.
We've also got Michael Hudson, Director at Creative Victoria. Creative Victoria is an agency formed after the 2014 state election and is part of the Department of Jobs, Precincts and Regions. Creative Victoria is responsible for championing, promoting and growing Victoria's creative industries, spanning arts, culture, screen and design. It's a funding and advisory body and supports a diverse array of creative organisations, delivers programmes and initiatives to drive economic growth, develop Victorian talent and encourage all Victorians to engage in art and culture. And at Creative Victoria, Michael heads up the strategy, screen and design branch with a diverse range of responsibilities related to sector development in design, fashion, film, television and digital games. He also oversees creative industries policy development and led work on the state's first ever creative industry strategy, Creative State, released in 2016, which we will get into a little bit more in a moment. So thank you and welcome, Michael, as well. So,
thanks, David.
Michael, I might start with you. We've just referenced the Creative State 2016 there. So Creative Victoria, as we said, is a government agency developed in 2014, delivered the first Creative State strategy in 2016, of which obviously the studio was an action point. It was a $115 million investment into Victoria's creative industries. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about the impetus behind the creation of the department and also Creative State strategy.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. Or Dave, I should say. So it was a significant point, I think, in government policy around culture and the arts in 2014, which was the time of the election. And in fact, it was part of the election platform for the incoming government at the time. And part of the rationale for the creative industries portfolio was to provide to the whole creative sector a broader recognition for the range of benefits that we get from that sector. So economic, social and cultural domains were mentioned right up front as the areas that we needed to focus on a bit more. And when Creative Victoria was formed shortly after the election, it was deliberately put into the business department. It's under a different name at that time, but in the business department. And again, that was very deliberate because it was seen as a way to gain, in a sense, a bit more credibility in an environment these days driven very much by economics. It was important. It was an important step for the arts sector to be seen, to be recognised for the credibility and for the value that it brings economically, and not just for cultural value and social value. Remembering always that those were also part of the equation, but this was a way to express it in a much broader range of benefits. It did mean that we had to change language a little bit to start talking economic language into government a bit more, and some of that was around little things, for example, like using the word trade sometimes instead of touring, or using markets instead of audiences. Little things like that.
Yeah.
And one of the important things we did early on was commission some work to get a sense of what the value was economically, because up until then we didn't really have a clear idea about that. And that's where the figure of, I think it was $23 billion at the time, back in about 2015, and it's now closer to $31 billion in terms of its contribution to the Victorian economy. So it gave us a bit more credibility, and we thought a bit more of an ability to leverage funding commitment from government.
Yeah, and it's interesting when you talk about using those ways to gain credibility. When you talk about $23 billion, the value to the Victorian economy, what I noticed from the strategy was that that's actually more valuable to the Victorian economy than the construction industry, which is a huge focus for governments when they come in is about construction, how to kickstart the economy via construction. Yet we have an industry that's actually worth more than that. So I think it's really great that we actually have the department and the strategy now to back that up. And one of the themes of the creative strategy was actually about delivering wider economic and social impact. So it's good that the themes of the strategy reflected the impetus behind the creation of the department and the strategy as well, I suppose.
And the important thing about that as well, Dave, if I could just add a little bit more to that, is that not only are the creative industries unique for the range of value that they provide to Victoria in the social, cultural and economic sense, but they are also applied across industries. So you referred to the wider economic and social impact. Creative industries is one of those things that can be used in the finance industry and in construction. Creativity and the application of creativity is across the economy, much more so than the more vertically aligned industry sectors. So it adds value in a number of dimensions.
Absolutely. I was interested by the comment in the creative state strategy that says creativity should not be measured solely against business objectives, although its economic value must be clearly recognised. And I was keen to know what your thoughts are about some of the other important metrics to consider when we're going to measure the success of creative industries.
Well, as you no doubt know, government's obsessed with metrics, and economic ones tend to be the easy ones. They've had economists crawling over them for years, and so it's why we got the $23 billion figure at the time. Jobs are easy to measure. So those things, and exports and things like that, they're easy. More difficult is how you measure social and cultural benefit. So if we're talking about, if we're trying to get support for commitment for creativity in the arts, and we're talking social and cultural benefit, the first thing we get asked is, well, how are we going to know, what are we going to measure in terms of our return on that investment in those ways? And that's something we really have put a lot of work into over the last 4 years. It was actually one of the actions. I think the very last action in Creative State was about a measurement framework. And there is now a measurement framework up on the Creative Victoria website, and it refers to measures in social and cultural domains, but there are no direct measures in that space in the way that we do have direct measures for economics. So they tend to be more proxy measures in a way that indicate health or improvement in those sections. And they're areas which intuitively we know are delivering great value, but in terms of getting a figure on them, it's difficult. So some of the measures in that space, for example, are what the diversity looks like, or levels of participation in the arts indicate a social kind of value. How much volunteering there is in the arts is an interesting one, I think, because it shows a degree of social cohesion, social engagement, where community sees value in it. And cultural are I think of the three, it's probably the hardest one to actually measure, because that goes to issues of identity and belonging and pride and these things, which are very difficult to put numbers on. I don't think it's really possible. But we do have some kind of proxy measures in there again around attendance at festivals, awards, the number of festivals broadly across the state. We've got lots of creative-based and cultural festivals. So we can track these sorts of things, and they provide an indication of there being cultural value without being able to measure directly that phenomena. That's really too hard. And we often make the argument that we shouldn't have to in a way. Why do we need to bring everything down to a number? It's far too reductionist and limiting.
Yes, absolutely. And you may have seen, you may have seen some of the things going around on the social media channels that talk about, during isolation, during lockdown, just remember the value of the creative industries, because where is it that you're turning to while you're in lockdown? Is it your favorite book, discovering new music, or a new Netflix series, or any of those, and what it might be? And just remembering that all of that comes from the creative industries. Yeah.
That's right. And I think Churchill said something like, if we're not fighting a war for the arts, then what for? I'm sure I've butchered his quote, but
it's attributed to Winston Churchill, but apparently he never said it. So,
you just burst the bubble there.
I know. He said something similar. Anyway, Matt, I might bring you into the conversation if that's okay. We've talked a little bit about the economic benefits and the social benefits of creativity, and I noticed from the Greater Creative Bendigo strategy that the cultural and creative industries actually make up 13.3% of employment in Bendigo, so it's significant. And the creative strategy was released in July 2019, I think it was, and I was there at the launch. It was a great event. And this followed up a previous arts and culture strategy. And I'm just wondering, or interested to know what the strategy was behind, or the theory or the thinking behind moving from a strategy around arts and culture to one that, included all the creative industries.
Good question. Look, I think Council over a number of years has recognised that, the creative sector, artists are important, not only for the cultural life of Bendigo, but also if you look at the Bendigo Art Gallery, the economic benefits and the employment. But there is a much broader understanding today around the role and place of creativity, whether it be health and wellbeing, our sense of community, our cultural, social inclusion and diversity. And whether you're a community arts practitioner or a mum and dad that drop your loved one off to dance classes, or you're an aspiring professional or a mid-career, latter-career artist, or you use the medium in a more therapeutic mode, it's quite a broad continuum that actually falls under this umbrella of creativity. So what we wanted to do is we thought, right, we've established the reputation of Bendigo as being a cultural destination, but there's much more to the piece than we're actually addressing in the old policy. So that's where the inspiration came from. But we're also finding that there are a lot of sectors in the creative community in Greater Bendigo that felt disconnected, didn't feel like they belonged to the community. So we wanted to make sure that all those voices were heard. So we had 3 large creative conversations, one at Alumbra, one at Bendigo Pottery, and one at the tramways, just to make sure everyone had an opportunity to feed into the strategy. It's a bit of a cradle to the grave strategy, sort of regardless of what stage or how you utilise creativity, that the city as a municipality is going to be there and is going to treat creativity as serious business.
Yeah, and what we'll actually do is put the we'll put links to both strategies actually in the comments. So if people want to refer to them, I've got a printout of the Bendigo one right there, but you can get them online, and we'll put links in the comments to those strategies as well. So Bendigo.
Sorry, can I say one more thing? It's probably worth noting that moment with Creative State was an absolute landmark moment in Victoria's recognition and the way it perceives the creative sector. And it's great to hear all the work that Michael and the teams inside of Creative Victoria have been doing. Sometimes, I'm sure people look at me as a councillor, or whether you work in a creative department, as being sort of disconnected and out of touch. But I'm just a grumpy theatre maker that worked out that if you can get involved with policy, you can start to make a difference in creatives' lives. So there's more people coming from that place than sometimes we realise. So I think there's some great work happening, particularly in Victoria. I just want to acknowledge the work of the state government and the department in that regard as well.
Great, thanks for that, Matt. There is a lot of great work, and coming out of Creative State Strategy, might come back to you for this one, Michael. Coming out of the strategy, there were 5 themes in there. We talked about one, delivering wider economic and social impact. There was also backing creative talent, strengthening the creative industries ecosystem, which I think is what Studio really falls into that theme. Increasing participation and access, and building international engagement. I'm wondering, there were 40 actions that came out of those 5 themes. You really can
Sorry, David, you broke up there and I missed the
Still got your Michael?
There. You're just breaking up a bit. I couldn't quite hear you there. Would you mind repeating?
Sure. So the question was around the 40 actions within the creative state strategy, and whether there's any of those that in your mind really ticks for those themes that are captured within the creative state strategy.
Yeah, probably one of my favourite actions was the business acceleration action. And the reason I choose that, it actually got launched as Foundry 658. It was listed in the creative state strategy as business acceleration, I think, but it responded to the lack of any support for startup creative businesses. But if you look around our economic ecosystem, there's heaps of support for tech startups, and it's all about IT and fast growth in technology and all the rest of it. There was none that focused on creative businesses that didn't necessarily have a strong tech angle. Some of them, of course, do. And so we wanted to put in place something that gave people, creative people, some training in how to start a business and how to understand where they could maybe earn a greater income stream. Part of that program was providing some seed funding, and we had about a dozen companies go through, and some really interesting ones that were at the heart of that kind of artistic or creative products, but which gave them a way to think about it in a slightly different frame. So it was really representative of the creative industries portfolio, shifting a little bit out of that sort of arts portfolio. So that was one that I really liked. The other one, I think, to be fair, I think we should highlight the studio. One of the great themes out of Creative State was he didn't put me up to that. But spaces, creative spaces was a really strong theme in the consultation back then, and again more recently when we were out last year talking to people. A real need for space, for collaboration, to connect with people, and for resources, shared resources, and to share costs. I'm really pleased. I mean, it took a while from 2015 or so to get the studio open, and that was a long process involving a lot of people from around the city. So I'm really pleased we got to that point. So I think that's another one that's really representative of what was needed in the sector across that time.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Michael. And I can confirm back to you, I suppose, that with the people that I talked to, obviously, there's a lot of excitement, it seems to me, around the opening of the studio. So we can't wait to open the doors physically instead of virtually. The space that we're in at the moment looks great and it feels great, and there's a lot of excitement. A lot of people can't wait to get in. So it'll be really good to do that. We do have a question actually on our Facebook stream from Andrew. Has any government department been looking at, has anyone been looking at the way other countries measure the significant impact of the creative sector, particularly in countries that have a good reputation in this area? So we were talking about those social measurements before, and I think the question talks to whether there are any other countries that perhaps do it well.
There's a lot of effort actually around the world going into this, and no one's cracked the nut. And in fact, one of the most advanced pieces of work is the Cultural Development Network, which is an Australian group, I think led by John Smithies. And so he's had a methodology for measuring cultural value in development and being refined for some years, and we've done pilots around that. He's also used that in other jurisdictions, I think overseas, but also across Australia. So we don't always have to look overseas for it. We have, in the context of doing our framework, we did look at methodologies overseas, and there's a UN body that has also done some good work in this, and it's ongoing, and we've got a sort of seat at the table with them. So it's a work in progress, and yes, we are sort of connecting with the international work going on in that space.
Okay, great. Well, I might use that as a little bit of a segue here, because UNESCO is actually something that's been a bit of a talking point around Bendigo in terms of creativity. And many people will know that the City of Greater Bendigo actually achieved a Creative City designation through the UNESCO Creative Cities Network as a city of gastronomy. And handing over to you again, Matt, I'm wondering why the City of Greater Bendigo thought this was an important designation to achieve, and what Bendigo sees as the opportunities that brings.
Yeah, look, I think there are a couple of parts to that answer. Initially, it taps us into a global creative cities network. There are 246 creative cities around the world that fall under that umbrella. It was also an important way, and I should acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we're meeting variously across the internet today and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. It was also an important way with gastronomy to link in the 6 seasons of the Dja Dja Wurrung people and to acknowledge the cultural heritage that was here before more of a European influence began to kick in. The great thing about the UNESCO's Creative Cities Network and a designation is that it does identify that creativity is a strategic factor when you're looking at sustainable urban development, and also that creative industries and creativity are at the heart of our development plans at a local level. Not only doing that individually here in Greater Bendigo, but being able to tap into that global think tank and how we can actually operate more efficiently. Geelong has a designation for design, Melbourne has literature, and Ballarat received their craft and folk art designation at the same time that we did. So what that offers Victoria is you've got 4 creative cities in a creative cities network that can begin to do joint projects across municipal and city boundaries. And it does help muscle up as a state, as well as the different regional areas, to ensure that we're providing opportunities. And I think this is one of the big things. We're always told going through drama school that if you're waiting for the phone to ring, it probably never will. But I think a big role that local government plays is continuing to provide the opportunities and to facilitate experience where people can build their networks, can create the relationships, and hopefully generate work or connections out of that as well. So the more opportunities like UNESCO Creative Cities Network, it's better for the city, it's better for the creatives, and it creates a more livable environment at the same time. So we're very excited with the designation.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And in a conversation I was having yesterday, somebody pointed out that events, when we get back to having these style of events, but there's a lot of events that focus on food and art combined, and there's a great linkage there. And I'm really pleased that you mentioned about the other cities, Ballarat and Geelong, for example, that have got the designation, because it actually refers again in the City Greater Bendigo strategy about how municipal boundaries are not so relevant. It's about capturing the work of everybody and making those relationships happen for the greater good. Michael, I believe you were within the international, the international unit at UNESCO, which looks after, the international unit at Creative Victoria, which has a UNESCO program in it. So, do you see are there any other benefits that you see from cities like Ballarat and Bendigo and Geelong getting this designation?
Yeah, I think the UNESCO Creative Cities Network is fantastic. And I think probably Melbourne has underused it over the time. I think Melbourne's designation arrived in 2008. And it does open up a fabulous network of creative collaborations and partnerships and projects if you want to make use of it. And the great position that it's put Victoria into with a total now of 4 creative cities is that we're the only sub-national jurisdiction in the world where that's true. And it does send, I think, a clear signal globally through that network of how important the state sees creativity as part of its future. Because one of the things that is probably even the most important part of the application process to UNESCO is to demonstrate how you think creativity contributes to the future of the city. So it's not so much about recognition for what you've done or what you've achieved. It's very much about how you see the future and where you see the growth and what you see as important. And I think that's a strong signal about Victoria that we can use within Victoria with our stakeholders and with the public to show how important we think creativity is for the future of the state. And it's really important positioning for us internationally. And it's interesting also with the fact that there's now something in the 200s, I think it's 270 odd cities now designated. It's a very big network, and we now have a South Pacific network, I think it is, being formed, which gives us a slightly sort of closer range of neighbours to work with, but all similarly motivated around creativity. And even within Australia, with the seven or so, I think, cities in Australia, there's also a close working relationship developing with them, and all of that I think is really, really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Just checking back in with the questions that we asked at the start. For anybody who's watching, we're really keen also to have you guys as part of the conversation. Really keen to know what your creative businesses are doing through this period, how you guys have been affected, what the impact has been, and how you guys are looking to address that. And also any support that you guys are looking for. Just interested to get feedback from our creative industries. We have had a comment within the feed saying that all work has dried up. And I think that's lots of work cancelled. And that's something that I've heard from other creatives, photographers, especially who've had months and months of work just cancelled in a heartbeat. So it's really devastating for a lot of people. So please do share. We'd love to get some feedback from the people that we're supposed to be helping. Another question that's come through: do you need to have a beard to be creative? Asking for a friend. No, but it helps, I think. So
this is the COVID lockdown beard, unfortunately.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of men wanting to grow beards during this time. Anyway, getting back to the discussion. So we've got Michael Hudson from Creative Victoria and Matt Emond from the City of Greater Bendigo joining us today, and we've been talking about the strategies, the creative state strategy and the City of Greater Bendigo creative strategy. Creative Victoria also has a new strategy in development, and I believe it's awaiting approval, pending approval, once we move out of this current crisis. And I know there's a big consultation process that goes on to determine what the strategy should be. I'm wondering if you're able to share, Michael, what some of the themes are that came out of that consultation process for the next creative state strategy. What were you finding? What were people saying?
Yeah, look, it was really interesting. Actually, we had the consultation was late last year, and we did get to a very close point, but then coronavirus hit, and everything's been thrown really into an abeyance. And I think things have changed now so much that we will have to revisit the content. But what came out in terms of themes were really interesting this time compared with 4 or 5 years ago. We had themes that were not directly about creative industries that came out really strongly. And there were 5 of them, which I'll just list quite quickly. One was the importance of First Peoples' contribution and participation in creative sector. Another one was environment. Really didn't come up much 5 years ago, but came up very strongly now. Health and wellbeing was a really strong theme, obviously affecting a lot of people in the creative industries, and some of the stats there are quite revealing around particular difficulties compared with other sectors. Regional was another really strong one. So people felt very strongly that these sorts of policies shouldn't be about Melbourne, but should be very inclusive. And diversity and inclusion was the 5th one. So all of those, not so directly about creative industries, but what they told us and what they convinced us was that whenever we do something in the way of an action to support the creative industries, we should be considering the impact and the impact on those themes. So how is this action going to be going to assist First Peoples? How will they get access to that? Will it be equitably applied across the state and across different cohorts within the state? Will it damage the environment? How can we structure it in a way that it will introduce a positive environmental impact? So it will cause us to, as a sort of deliberate pause in our development of actions, to make sure that we frame them and implement them in a more responsible way in service of those themes. And I think whatever happens with coronavirus and all the rest of it, they will remain in the next version of the creative industry strategy as really important cross-cutting themes.
Yeah, okay, and they sound like great themes. I'm really encouraged and happy to hear about it, especially the regional one. It's a fantastic one to hear that came through.
Indeed.
Just seeing a few more comments and questions come through, which I'll just share. So Tamara, networking is really important during this time. Love to see some investment helping to bring people together beyond webinars, maybe hackathons to solve local problems, and that networking between creatives and industries not usually working with creatives, i.e. manufacturing. I think that's a fantastic point, and certainly something we'd like to see happen. Also a comment about the gaming industry. Is stable or potentially growing in Australia right now? Will the local government or other strategy activity add to this? It's an interesting one. I think Ballarat has a really strong gaming scene. I get the feeling that not so much in Bendigo at the moment.
It's something I'd love to see. With obviously a big part of local. I'm a big fan of not centralising creativity. I think the best thing local government to do is to keep providing opportunity, and advocacy is a big one. So Deakin University have come up a couple of times with a sort of a toe in the water approach. But look, I think having a gaming presence here in Bendigo will be important. It's almost like the 21st century's art form, sort of Hollywood cinema last century and opera a few hundred years before that. But everything from composition to design, interconnectivity, it's great. Like it covers all bases.
Narrative storytelling, all of that. Yeah.
It'd be great to have a presence.
Yeah. So if anybody listening knows anybody who's active in the gaming industry in Bendigo, let me know, please. It'd be great to connect. Louise has put a comment that she's received a lot of support from clients who've been in a position to offer it during this time, which is really great to hear. That community is coming together to support each other during this time. Okay, I will very quickly move on to a couple of the final questions that I have. And one of the reasons I was really encouraged to hear that the regional aspect came through in the consultations that you've done were. One of the questions I wanted to ask are, do you see any advantages in working within the creative industries within a regional context?
Oh, look, I think
that's an open question to either of you.
Oh, look, I think the first one is the cost of living is greatly reduced if you're based in a regional centre. It does make a big difference. Having the space to think, being surrounded by the natural environment, I think as well is a big advantage. I've sort of been working primarily out of Melbourne and Sydney in the early part of my career and moved back home to Bendigo about 8 years ago. Some people said that's creative suicide. I tended to disagree. But look, I do think there are definite benefits. Also in Bendigo at the moment, you can jump on a plane at the Bendigo airport, fly up to Sydney. You've got access to the rest of the world, or jump on the train and head down to Melbourne. And the Calder corridor along that tram, it's amazing the number of theatre makers, designers, artists that are living in Castlemaine, Woodend, Macedon. So it is becoming a bit of a hotspot. But I think what's emerging in Bendigo particularly is a lot more artists are moving up here, but also the more commercial end of the sector, architects, branding and marketing agencies. Where in Castlemaine you do tend to attract a lot more, let's say, more artists proper or traditional art forms congregating there. But the fact that we're so close together, I think, is a really, really important thing. I think probably the biggest impediment and the thing we do need to be conscious of, and what we tried to do with the creative conversations, was pull everybody together to be able to have the chat, have a glass of wine, have a talk, build the relationships and to see where they begin to head off. That's the one thing I think we really need to work hard on regionally. But I think there are a lot of definite advantages.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the we talked a little bit there about collaboration, whether that be with other cities within the UNESCO designation or just collaboration on a individual to individual basis. I think that's really interesting, and it's something that Studio is seeking to activate, if you like, by bringing people together, diverse range of creatives within one space, and seeing what can happen from the incidental conversations that happen and people sharing the work that they're doing. Okay, so we are drawing towards the end. I'm just going to have another quick look here. We've got another question from Andrew. While it's great to have, does the UNESCO designation of gastronomy possibly restrict or impact on other creative activities or slant the emphasis in terms of what is promoted or prioritized within the Bendigo region? So that's an interesting question.
No, it doesn't. It only enhances. We went to Dunedin, the mayor, myself, the CEO and the director of strategy and growth. And even just through that initial point of contact, when we did start to look seriously at a City of Gastronomy designation, they've got literature. But even then, the collaborations that happen between cities, you don't have to be of the same designation to tap into that creative output. I think that's the exciting opportunity. The great thing about the gastronomy bid is it goes hand to hand with any other creative endeavour. Good food, good wine, a healthy lifestyle are a lot of things that artists, by their very nature, being experiential beings, tend to be drawn to as well. So, no, it doesn't limit opportunity. I think it only opens up a greater possibility.
Yeah. And I would agree wholeheartedly with that.
So would I, Dave. I mean, we also see that happening a lot. So the designations, I think, maybe had a lot more significance in the early days, but the network really works well beyond those. And I think that's been a really positive thing, getting all the cities getting involved in, across designations. There is some talk at UNESCO about whether they get rid of the 6 or 7 designations altogether and just make it a Creative Cities network. That hasn't got anywhere just yet, but there is a recognition that a city is not only expert or interested in one of those areas, and the reality is, and in Bendigo's case, you probably could have got design if you'd wanted. You've got great credentials in design and fashion and so forth. So it's not a limiting factor at all, that sort of thing. It's really broad.
Yeah. Okay, well, I've got one more question, which again is an open question for the both of you before we wrap up. It's one that talks about really the times that we're in, and we know that the creative industries are one of the hardest hit industries by the current crisis that we are in, probably second only to the hospitality industry, I think. There's been a lot of talk about it. My question is, how do we ensure that creatives are still active during the crisis and that creatives are there for us when we come out of this?
Yeah, for me, I think there are 2 paths to go down with the question. One is ensuring that there's not a disruption of the creative output. I think the opportunity at the moment, I'm finding myself doing this. I was saying to my partner today that I'm putting in writing more funding applications that I've actually had the space to do for a long, long time, sort of with the view of sort of setting up 2021 with a view to 2022. So I think for those that do require their creative output to generate cash flow to actually live, I think the opportunity to get those applications done, to really think about what those passion projects are and who you can team up with, I think there's an opportunity there. But to do that, we need to make sure that there's food relief, that you've got cash flow coming through now. And I think that's another thing as a city. We've done some immediate responses to that, particularly about supporting food relief, holding off payments if you're paying rates, etc., and deferring or putting off accumulation of interest just to give people breathing space. But the Multicultural Arts Victoria website has a really good section where it breaks down government, non-government and campaign support. And I would just like to give a shout out for anyone working in the theatre and entertainment sector, cast or crew. The Victorian Actors Benevolent Trust are providing $250 food vouchers for people that do require assistance. And there are a lot of other opportunities. I think the Australia Council 2020 Resilience Fund is in operation, and Michael probably a bit more across what's happening from Creative Vic. But I think ensuring people understand and know where the sources of support are, I think is going to be very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that. Michael, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. I mean, I'd endorse all of that. I think there has been quite a lot of government focus on what's needed right now, and some quick work, I think, federally as well as state and local levels, JobKeeper and JobSeeker and so forth. And while they're not perfect and there are gaps and things, they've done a really sort of great job in helping bridge some of that gap and helping people get through what are really difficult times. I'm endorsing that comments there about development. I think if you can, this is a great time to do development work. Creative Victoria did announce the Sustaining Creative Workers program, and they're open at the moment. And that is about work that can be done without a performance environment, if you like, or without a sort of collaborative environment where you require that sort of physical connection. And so that's one way to do it. I'm also really heartened to see a lot of the adaptations that are going on in the sector. There's a lot of people who maybe wouldn't have considered digital before, who are thinking about what that means now and doing their own innovative work. Sessions like this are emerging, and I suspect that when all the restrictions are relaxed, we're going to see a lot more of this sort of stuff going on, because it's valuable in its own right. It doesn't just need to be there as a stopgap and to sort of fill the space, while we get back to normal. So I think all of that's, really important to keep going with that.
Dave, can I also mention this is a really unusual time. We're putting together our budget that was meant to have been endorsed for public consultation at the last meeting coming up. That'll be coming out. It'll be a nimble budget. I'd be very interested to hear, and if anyone watching or listening today wanted to email me directly any thoughts or feelings they have about how local government can help, whether it be the relief or the recovery stages of COVID-19, m.emond, M-O-N-D, at bendigo.vic.gov.au. Really keen to hear from people. We've established an Arts and Creative Industries Advisory Committee, and this is one of the agenda items we'll be tackling at the next meeting in about a week and a half as well. So we do want to hear from the ground, the people that it is affecting, and to make sure that the decisions we make in local government can make a difference, and that the budget's nimble enough that in 2 months or 6 months' time, if things do change, that we can shift and adjust as required as well.
Yeah. Great, thanks so much for that, Matt. That's fantastic to hear that, getting that feedback, whether it's through the consultation periods or through direct communication with yourself, is fantastic. I'm going to wrap it up there. What is just left is for me to say thank you to Michael and thank you to Matt for joining us. It's been really encouraging to hear from my perspective about all the support that's out there for creatives. And what I really love is a lot of the alignment that is happening between the work of the state and the work that's happening locally. So hopefully I really look forward to working all working together. We had a slight blackout there for a moment. So I'll wrap it up there. Don't forget to join us for our next ones. We've got Christian Wagstaff on the 21st of May. We're going to be having a conversation around the performing arts on the 4th of June. And on the 18th of June, the world's favourite colour. Make sure you join us for that. Thank you to everyone who tuned in and for your questions and comments. We'll be putting the links in to the strategies within the comments as well. And I hope everybody has a great evening, a great weekend, and stay safe. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.